we'll be covering today the Great Wealth Transfer. And obviously the title is a little ominous sounding. We're going to try to put everyone in a position to where they can be winners, right, when it comes to the Great Wealth Transfer. But we'll be talking about a lot of the reasons, obviously, why some nonprofits aren't necessarily positioned for success at the moment. Okay. So I'm Pat Duffy. I've got Ettore with me. We've done our bios, but we'll dig into the groups that we work with. So I'm one of our two co-founders here at the Giving Block. The long and short of it is we're the main solution nonprofits use to take cryptocurrency donations primarily. Been doing that for about 5 years. Leading experience for nonprofits and for donors when it comes to crypto acceptance, just automate away a lot of the issues associated with it. And then we build custom fundraising programs for hundreds of charities when it comes to crypto. The exciting news about us is the stock and the DAF product, just because obviously most crypto donors obviously also have stocks as well. We're seeing a lot more donors giving both ways. So we tried to digitize the stock giving experience to get more millennials giving stock donations. And because a lot of these donors are super financially literate, DAF donations are on the rise as well from younger donors. So ensuring that these super tax literate, financially literate, high net worth, younger type donors are able to give all the digital ways they want to give. That's kind of what we're getting down to at the Giving Block. And I'll kick it over to Ettore.
And Save the Children has been around for more than 100 years. We give kids three things: a healthy start in life, the opportunity to learn, and protection from harm, from everything from the climate crisis to war and conflict. So we're working both on the ground in Gaza and in Ukraine, for example. We're proud to be one of the Giving Block's early, if not first, clients. And we have a track record of innovation and a pioneering spirit from our founder, Eglantine Jeb, who wrote the Declaration of the Rights of the Child, which was ratified at the Geneva Convention and now the basis of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and UNICEF. So we're super proud of that history, and we work in more than 120 countries around the world as well.
Okay, awesome. So poll question for folks who are here in the audience. Do you know today what the median age of your donors is? If so, what is that number? So we'll give everyone a moment here to complete the poll. While we do that, I guess I'll throw in a fun fact about Ettore. Ettore and Save the Children have been fundraising crypto for so long, well before the creation of the Giving Block as a company, that a $5,000 crypto donation at the time Ettore began accepting it would be worth $2 million today. So
I wish we huddled,
early OG.
Pat. I wish we huddled, but for the longest time we had a policy of converting to fiat value. So, but anyway, we're thinking about revising that policy. And the poll results are up, Pat.
Okay, sweet. So median age, we've got some nonprofits, actually a handful, where the median age of the donors is millennials. That's fantastic to see. We've got a good mix of Gen X, and I'm not sure. And then we've got baby boomers in the lead, of course, which is normal for the sector. About half of the nonprofits in the line have baby boomers as their average. So I'm sure the I'm not sure blends a little bit above and below and across the baby boomer metric. But that's super good to know, just to give everybody context. It's the reason why a presentation like this is so valuable. If we jump to the next slide. So awesome agenda for everybody today. We're going to run through the Great Wealth Transfer and the Millennial Donor, take a look at what this actually looks like, down to the numbers and the individual profiles. We're then going to do a live case study with Ettore here on balancing modern methods with traditional tactics, how to avoid the mistakes some nonprofits make of digital transformation at the expense of this older donor demographic that is like really a core contributor. Nonprofits being forced to make what is a binary decision when really it can be much more complementary. And then at the end, we're going to do an overview, touch on all of the most important features of what makes these programs tick when they're built properly, and what nonprofits can do about making changes that put them in a better position to be future-proof. Okay, the Great Wealth Transfer. Let's dig in. Okay, so when we look at the Great Wealth Transfer, first thing you'll notice is a lot of money, right? Like you see these different numbers from 30 trillion to 48 trillion, depending on how they want to summarize the transfer of wealth from one generation to the other. a lot of money is moving hands. What that means for nonprofits is that while some of this wealth has already been transferred to Gen X, Millennials, Gen Zs, a lot of it has not changed hands yet. And as you're looking at where this capital sits, donor loyalty, who's going to have these large sums of money and how they're looking to transfer those funds to a nonprofit, it's changing pretty quickly. When you look at these older donors, in particular on the baby boomer side and beyond, who give with checks, they give cash in an envelope, they initiate a bank transfer, they send something like a stock donation through a broker, third parties, RAs, etc. We're seeing a big difference when it comes to younger donors in terms of preferring a digital touchless giving experience and being okay with things like a little bit more digital contact. And then Ettore, obviously, for all of these slides, like feel free to jump in and out. We'll kick it around throughout. When it comes to the millennial donor profiles, demographics are shifting, values are shifting, motivations are shifting, and then so are habits. So each of these lets us know something different about the donor base. So in terms of the demographics, the donors on the receiving end, when we think about millennials specifically, born between 1981 and 1996, these donors are, I mean, just this is how time works, but older than I think a lot of nonprofits think they are. I think a lot of people still think of Gen Zs as millennials. Millennials is kind of like extended to be anyone who's in high school and beyond. People just kind of hitting the start of their career. But that shifted quite a bit. We have a lot of these folks reaching their peak earning years. It is now the largest generation in the US with nearly 72 million millennials. Um, a lot more millionaires are now millennials. And we're also seeing a shift in their values. So 87% of millennials are giving to charity. 23% want to be known for their philanthropy. So when you think about acknowledgments, recognition, what it looks like to do that both digitally and physically, these donors are shifting. And then value loyalty is more important than brand loyalty. So as we saw with older donors, where they would really stick to one nonprofit, we're seeing donors kind of give on the basis of their values. So that means they may be shifting from one nonprofit to another nonprofit who does similar work just because a particular nonprofit is working on a particular cause, Ukraine, a refugee crisis, what we're seeing in Gaza. You can see humanitarian aid, for instance, for people who need it most, going across organizations rather than sticking to one issue. And then you're also seeing value loyalty down to kind of their political and ideological orientation at a particular point in time. So sometimes what they ultimately value is helping people, helping disenfranchised, economic empowerment, and you'll see that translate across a number of different causes throughout their life. I'll pause for a second on the values piece, Ettore. Is this something that you're seeing with younger donors and Save the Children? Because you guys tackle so many different issues across the globe.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Pat, for sure. I think this is critical. And later there'll be a slide about sort of our hypothesis on let's call it nonprofit brand loyalty. But two things I'd like to add. One, there's a book, Groundswell, by Josh Bernoff and Charlene Lee, and it was basically about social media, right? And in short, they said the number one indicator of which social network or social media platform a user would use is based on their age. And that's a sort of a technographic profile. So the tools of the trade from past generations don't necessarily work the best for future generations, though the storytelling and the impact stories is a commonality across generations.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like we're seeing a similar thing. It really comes down to what's resonating with them at a particular moment. The people aren't changing, right? But like you're saying, the stories change and the areas of impact as well. Um, and then in terms of motivations, authenticity and transparency, these are huge. The transparency component is changing a lot. We've seen that a lot in crypto as well. People love crypto for its transparency, the immutable ledger, the records that can never be changed. People think of it as anonymous because the individual users don't need to reveal their identity, but institutions can be a lot more transparent. And then habits. So one of the biggest things, there's wanting to be ambassadors. It's more mobile than desktop, but I'd say one of the largest things with these younger donors is a digital first mindset. So when we look at these older traditional ways of giving money, major gifts in particular, They're not going into a brokerage account to initiate a DAF transfer. They're expecting a plaid kind of on-page experience. They're not downloading a PDF with brokerage instructions. They're initiating a transfer through a form. Crypto, same thing. Scanning a QR code, initiating a transfer, hovering their phone over device versus pulling out a credit card. Being on the cutting edge of gift acceptance outside of even things like crypto is going to be really important as the expectation gets increasingly intense for it to be seamless, touchless, and super easy. Next slide.
Yeah, and I just add one thing, Pat, about
Please.
the authenticity and transparency motivation you talked about. On the authenticity side, just a cautionary note about use of AI for generating images and video. You know, if you do so, you know, those sorts of things ought to be disclosed. You don't want to like fool your supporter. And on the transparency side, a nod to Pat's comment about the transparency of the blockchain is so important and gels with this particular cohort.
Yeah, I completely agree. They want to know what's really behind all this. Um, so fundraising trends that are really important, we'll dig into all of this. Leveraging digital platforms. There are a lot of nonprofits who I think are wary of navigating to new types of technology and social platforms. This goes back to the ambassador mindset. There are huge opportunities for charities all over the world, big and small, to just ask their donors if they're into this stuff. We say it about crypto, we say it about new platforms, like even if you're not using TikTok, Twitter, etc., Reddit. The same thing is true for different types of investments. Just ask your audience, right? Are you into crypto? Are you into NFTs? Do you know how to use TikTok, right? Farcaster, whatever the thing might be. Ask your audience who's good at it, who's into it. There's tons of people on college campuses in particular who are looking for an opportunity to show that they can do something special. They want to put in the work and they want to help you get better at things. You don't have to build a skill set from scratch. You can kind of rely on your audience to be your ambassadors as well as your donors. Compelling storytelling is becoming more important than ever. There's a lot of nonprofits at conferences where you hear a lot of consultants with the same talking point where they're like, ask harder, ask more often, keep the ask going. Sometimes it really comes down to the story when it comes to whether or not an event is well attended or an email is getting opened. It's more important than ever for the content to be compelling. People are overloaded. Their attention spans aren't as long, right? They're looking for people to be getting to the point with snackable content that makes it clear what the impact is. Personalized experiences are really important as well. Tailoring the experience to the user, making sure content reaches the right people as you segment your audience through your CRM. Crypto donations, as well as digital versions of stock, DAF, and even more traditional modes like ACH payments through something like Plaid. Um, People want to be able to transfer money to you easily and painlessly. If you give only younger donors a credit card option, you can expect an average gift size of, $100 a pop. Going digital on things like crypto, stock, donor advised funds, bank transfers. These are gift sizes of $5, $10, $15,000 on average. The doors are not open to younger donors if you're giving them a PDF with brokerage instructions. Big reason why younger people don't give some of these major gifts. And then finally, mobile text appeals, right? These people have their phones in their pocket all the time. Older donors are gravitating toward this as well. It's just becoming the norm across the board. It's an underused forum in terms of not only text appeals, but also mobile optimized websites, which takes us to the next section, which
So,
Ettore will
so
tackle.
Pat, do you mean I can't send in my pledge via fax machine?
Yeah, exactly. I can't tell. I will tell the audience I completed my first direct mail appeal recently. I've been telling people this for the last couple of months. They sent it to me. It was a QR code with the crypto option. And I hovered my phone over it. I was able to send $1,000 in 20 seconds. And I was like, this is beautiful. I was able to send first really serious gift to an organization I've been wanting to support, but I'd only ever received mail where it was like, you want to send us back a check? And I was like, absolutely not. Please don't make me
That's a
do it.
great use case actually, right there. The blending of traditional direct mail and a QR code of modern, such a smart convergence right there. Okay, so here's the case study from Save the Children. We're a long time Giving Block client, as I mentioned to you, and we use their tool set uh, in particular for crypto philanthropy, stocks, and also DAFs, all three of them. So the first is debunking the silver bullet myth. You know, according to Wikipedia, it's a metaphor for a simple and seemingly magical solution to a difficult problem. It is hard to retain a first time giver over the course of their giving career, right? And there's not necessarily one tool, one strategy, one tactic, or one method they'll be able to do it effectively. It is a mix, and it's based on the audience segment, and even now based on the one-to-one relationship that the donor has with the nonprofit. The second myth to debunk is I could just send the same message to everyone on my file, right? Whether that's email or direct mail or even the website, right? And this breaks down, and the metaphor that I use here is clothing, right? My wife happens to be a tailor. And you think about the one size fits all mantra. And if you remember, like hats, snapback hats, like one size fits all. And there must have been a lawsuit because that has changed to one size fits most. I mean, right? You don't want that. You want a customized, tailored stewardship strategy as one to one as you can get. And if it's intended for everyone, then it probably doesn't fit anyone. It's going to be average. It's going to be rounding the edges. So the one-to-one future, in fact, is here, right? There was a book, and it was dating myself a little bit, but it was available on audio cassette, and it was called The One-to-One Future by Martha Rogers and Don Peppers. And it talked about a future where you could, as an organization, deliver a message one supporter at a time at scale. And that might be considered paradoxical or not possible or an oxymoron. But it, in fact, now, especially with AI, is possible. So delivering the right message in the right format. In Pat's case that he gave, it was direct mail, but with a QR code. So it was the right format with the right call to action. Again, the drive to web, the digital, available on a mobile device. The fact that Pat scanned the QR code means he was using multiple media. He had the direct mail piece, and then he had his mobile phone, and the convergence of those two media, he was able to convert in the privacy of his own phone. That is so important for this next generation of digital donors. And at the right time, the right frequency. How many messages do you need to send in order to get one action, one conversion, without spamming them so you don't get the opt out forever? And then, of course, to the right donor. The key here is right means the supporter preference, not the nonprofit preference. The challenge with nonprofits is we see through our own glasses. We need to give those glasses to our supporter and look from their point of view. It's called empathy, walking in their own shoes, not walking in your shoes. And that is a big problem that we see with nonprofits is you think about your monthly, your quarterly, your annual fundraising goals, and then you increase the volume. That isn't based on their preference. That's based on your preference, your desire. So it's important to take the donor, the prospect, the supporter, and put them at the center. And that's supporter centricity, not channel centricity, not organization centricity. So again, the
Yeah.
tailoring visual metaphor. Go ahead, Pat.
I want to
Yeah.
just real quick on that, just because the title of the presentation, like why more losers than winners potentially. The stuff that you're hitting on here is all accurate, and I think it's just important to tie back a little bit. When we think about younger donors, like what Ettore is getting at here, if you go through some of these bullets, the right message, format, call to action, some of this really comes down to like how snackable the content is. Like I can't tell you when you just look across different generations, right? Like all of those studies where like the music videos and movies and like the changing of angles and shots per minute, per second, et cetera, like how rapidly that condenses. Like as you get into these infinite scrolls on social platforms, how much content people are bombarded with, depending on how young a person is, what generation they're a part of, how much content they consume. It could be the same message, but literally just doing things like starting with like the really important piece or bolding that, the way that the email is formatted, sitting it up at the top. I can't tell you how many of these long form emails that I get and other people get who are like inundated with content on the younger end that they never really get to it. And sometimes like the message actually is great, but the formatting is incorrect, or the call to action, to Ettore point, like where you have like the structure of the call to action where it's only asking a younger donor for that $10 a month because it's the average gift size. And then they're getting this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy for younger donors where it's like the call to action isn't framing the gift at that major gift bridge type level because they're not major givers yet, and they route these younger donors down and into the space that they've been in historically because the data previously tells them that. Then down to like these channels and the time, the frequency of the donor themselves. If you go to your nonprofit's website right now, I tell everyone to do this like a secret shopper. Have someone in your family go to my website and try to initiate a stock donation and just set a timer and just see what happens. How long did it take you to find the giving option? And then how easy is it to execute it? If it takes several minutes to find the giving option, it's over, right? For a younger donor, maybe an older donor, like with just a bit more attention span and grace, would spend 5 minutes poking around the menu to see which menu item. Oh, get involved means donate. Who would have thought that? And planned giving means putting something in a will. These terms that mean nothing to anyone. It's just like there's all these subtle things that are happening as you look at Uber Eats and everything. Like you can have anything you want as a millennial in a matter of seconds because the user experiences are so great. So much of it will come down to not changing your mission, not changing your message, but finding a way to format it in a snackable way and make it really easy to find, click, and use practically instantaneously. There's just so much room for growth around those edges where nonprofits, to Ettore point, are trying to find this big transformative silver bullet and they'll tack this crypto option on, and then they just never make it discoverable on the site. Like you'd have to do all this forensic work to even find the crypto option in the website, and it's like, what's the point of a new giving option if no one can even find it? So I'm just tying it back to everything that you're saying. There's so much opportunity to make a couple dozen very minor changes to what is already a really powerful mission and an impactful story that just isn't snackable, discoverable, or easy enough to use.
Yeah, I mean, so key there, Pat. And even the language, go to ways to help in planned giving. Pat is so right. That is internal language that's used externally, wonky language. You gotta, you don't want to talk in inside baseball terms. You want to talk in a vocabulary that the millennial donor and next gen donor know what you mean. So that's a great point. This next slide is an example of those theories actualized, and it's just an illustrative example, but it's the hyper personalization at scale now in the age of AI and with the advent of mass personalization like never before. There's a possibility to take what we just talked about, and if you want to speak to the millennial cohort of your supporters, there might be a different frequency, there might be a different message. So you'll notice everything from the message to the content type matters to the CTA, the call to action. What are you asking them to do? And it shouldn't be donate all of the time. If you're doing that, then again, that's the one size fits all strategy that you might think fits to everyone, but doesn't. And the preferred channel, right? Using SMS as a driver, as an inbound that could be from a QR code, or the length of the message. Pat mentioned snackable content. So, right, the human attention span is shorter than it's ever been. It's less than a goldfish, according to a Microsoft study in Canada. So, what are you going to do in the first 5 seconds with your hook to capture the attention of a millennial donor? Otherwise, they'll just click away. That's why, by the way, sort of the YouTube, pre-roll advertising has a skip feature, but the skip doesn't happen until you've already seen the Geico ad. And now you can skip it after 5 seconds. Like that's intentional. That is on purpose. And yet lots of organizations speak in the long form. The frequency of your messaging is another key one. It's hard to earn permission and easy to lose it. So don't abuse the permission you have. It's your most vital asset that you have of your donor, even more valuable than the contributions they make monetarily. It is the lifetime value, and how are you stewarding, how are you protecting the permission? If you acquire them in one channel and if they give you a preference, are you asking for a frequency preference? Are you just sending them email or text based on when you have a need? Now, some interruption marketing is socially acceptable, like at Save the Children, we're a humanitarian relief and response organization as well as long-term development. So if there's a rapid onset emergency, a text message or an email notifying our supporters of such the emergency and the way to respond to it is potentially socially acceptable, but don't abuse that privilege. Anything you'd like to add, Pat, before I go to the next slide?
I think it's just the one thing to point out is the time length duration. This is exactly like Ettore said, like how long it takes to find a giving method, how many seconds it takes to figure out what the goal is of the campaign, how many seconds or minutes it takes to figure out if I give you money, where does it actually go? What happens, right? There's levels of difficulty that people are willing to work through, and it drops off precipitously generation by generation, right? So there's a lot of things where just again, it's the format. It's of course like what it is you're reaching out to them about, how you target them through what channel. Um, but ultimately, you just got to think about like the timer is a lot shorter when it comes to different types of audiences, and always have that in mind when you're writing that social post and you're like, in a very exciting year for us in art, it's like it's over, right? Missed, done, dead. Millennials, Gen Zs, nope, no donations, ruined it. It's like, oh, but we have a great kit. It's nope, it's over. It's great. If you send that to something like Gen X, like it'll probably work. It's not that the campaign doesn't make sense. It's just it needs to be different. Right now, $50 feeds 50 families. We are doing it's just like whatever you have to figure out like that efficiency matrix. And then the only other thing I'll say as I look at this for the personalization, another big like why there'll be more losers than winners that I can see out of this is giving millennials the major gift options. It's so exciting. Like when people cross media, like we said, like seeing crypto in direct mail is more exciting than seeing it on Twitter. It's the same reason why hearing nonprofits talk about crypto is cooler than hearing people in their 20s and 30s talk about crypto. It feels different. It's in the place where it shouldn't be. It feels like adoption. It feels exciting. Is right. Like a big company having a billboard doesn't matter, but a small company having a billboard, like suddenly that's fun. There's so many younger donors waiting to feel important, and that opportunity to have like a 30-minute major gift call, like right before they're at that point, not because they sent you $1,000, but because you think they might, and to like have that folder on the table and have a conversation and be like, over the next 10 years, like what do you think your impact could be? And they're like, I could give 50 grand over the next 10 years. Like that's something I could figure out, probably less this year, but over time, like I want to make more money. Like just putting them in that position where you treat them like a philanthropist. So many nonprofits, they ask them for $10 a month, they get $10 a month, and because they asked for $10 a month and they didn't get 1,000, they never asked for 1,000. So many donors, just by being treated like maybe you could be a donor who could give more or do something more important. I think that's one of the biggest opportunities with millennials. The bridge is broken right now because none of their giving options exist. There's no way to give crypto or stock or the most tax optimized investments. And they're never getting invited into those conversations because they don't want to sit at a gala in a suit and tie. And they're getting asked for $10 a month, once every 3 weeks via email. So think about the channels that really work for those audiences in general, but look to those fringes because sometimes there's this crossover effect where like a direct mail piece that goes to a Gen Z could be exciting because no one's really sending a mail yet. And like they're getting a physical copy of the annual report and it's like nicely bound and it was mailed to them. It's like, oh, they mailed me this thing. Like suddenly that's interesting. So think about the crossover. Sometimes it's less than intuitive, but creating those bridges intentionally versus waiting for them to be a major donor, I think is a huge opportunity moving into the future.
Yeah, that's such a wise riff right there, Pat, and hopefully you all were listening to him because in fact, the advice about our crypto donors, because many of them at first donate anonymously and small, as what Pat has called in the past, kick the tire donations, or he's called it high five donations, right? Um, I'm going to reiterate that. Like, that's exactly how we steward our crypto donors. We treat every single donor, whether they gave $5 or 5 million bucks, every single crypto donor, as if they're a $1 million donor. What how might that transform the way you speak to that donor and how frequently and which channels and your level of gratitude, right? Because they're doing research on you, they find you faster than you find them, and they've already made their decision, right? And they've also done their research, and their first donation is relatively small. And if you pigeonhole them and you talk them as they're a mass market replaceable donor, then that it's self-fulfilling. In fact, that's one of our themes later, and that's what they will become, a really small mass market every now and then donor, if not drop off your file.
I completely agree. Just one last, I think we're doing okay on time, so I just want to tack on it because you're
Yes,
hitting
go
on
ahead.
something huge. Like that's where we have this hyper personalization slide, which is so important. This is like the opposite side of that. Creating space for these types of donors to hand raise in is huge. Like to Ettore point, like just because they gave $5 in crypto doesn't mean they put them on the full blown major gift type track. Because you hear a lot, especially smaller nonprofits who are on the line right now. It's like, oh, I don't have capacity to treat every $5 donor like a major donor. Like that means meetings and phone calls and flying out to them in person. It's like, it doesn't necessarily. It's giving people an opportunity to hand raise in. Like there's so many nonprofits in crypto in particular that try to run like a crypto campaign and find the crypto donors in their audience and build a profile and segment their CRM and find a CTA. Again, hyper personalization, which is great when you have the right data. Sometimes that can be the enemy, right? You want to hyper personalize once you know, but sometimes when you don't know, you don't even have to guess. Like you literally just take your younger donors at some point and you can just blast an email where it's kind of like, who wants to have like a lifetime philanthropy meeting with us this year? And just let the ones hand raise in who want to do it, right? You don't have to just book it with everybody. You just let people, same thing with the $5 crypto donors. Are you looking to give bigger over the course of this year? This is a tax optimized mode of giving. They can all get that email. And the ones who want to hand raise in will do it. When the capital campaign email goes out, you don't need a crypto capital campaign. You just have crypto, stock, DAF. You have these alternate giving options. And as they scroll to that page to send a donation, if that's the option they want, they'll use it. Like this hyper segmentation sometimes, I think for smaller nonprofits in particular, can be paralyzing. Anytime you can personalize these demographics and you have the capacity, to Ettore's point, it's so valuable. But when you feel like you can't, figure out how you can just kind of make a little extra space for everybody, right? And just don't make yourself paralyzed. You can give people and put them in a position to hand raise in. And I think not a lot of nonprofits are doing that often enough. They segment themselves into this self-fulfilling prophecy. I think where nonprofits have donors in a bucket that stay in the bucket.
Yeah, I love the hand raiser metaphor that you just used, Pat, because it's self-selection. We have found over the years, I've been with Save the Children for 19 years, right? An entire childhood for my kids who are now young adults. And one of the things I've learned is inbound marketing is more powerful than outbound marketing. That is the hand raiser mindset. But you have to give people an opportunity and a reason to select you, give them a hand raiser. And a lot of folks said, well, we'll just rent the mailing list or we'll treat this donor prospect the same way we treat everyone else. And that doesn't fit, that doesn't work. Whereas if you earn the opportunity for an inbound communication, it transforms the conversation and potentially the relationship. So here's another slide taking the concept of the persona types that you're going after and putting them in categories. As I mentioned, the technographics concept from the book Groundswell. Well, at Save the Children, we create donor personas so that the donors are not simply data points, so that they are human. We humanize those personas. We put a name, even though it's a fictitious name, we put a name on the donor. So this is just an illustrative example, but imagine a baby boomer named Janet, and we were going to, she may be an empty nester. She's well educated. She lives on one of the coasts in the United States, perhaps. She has, a household income, let's say, of around $100,000, and she's looking for causes to support and has already supported many causes through the traditional communication and response methods that nonprofits have used for a century, whether it's telephone or post mail or seeing TV ads, and now the technology tools are different in catching up to that generation. Or, you know, Xander, let's say Gen X, and a Gen X donor may have different tendencies and behaviors, but though that donor is somewhere in between the millennial and the baby boomer, and that donor is approaching their donor the bigger donation years, but why not start talking about leaving a legacy early? To Pat's point earlier, what happens is we get siloed in communicating at the time we think it's relevant to talk to a particular donor and not earlier than that. And that's sort of like a very, transparently harvesting way to talk to donors. Why don't you earn their loyalty, their trust by offering those options earlier? And if they hand raise or opt in earlier, then they're doing so. You're not deciding it for them. And then, of course, millennials. We've talked a lot about millennials. I won't belabor the point there, but the millennial, let's say the persona name is Olivia, and she has a toddler at home, and she's super busy, but she cares about kids. She's empathic about causes for children. I can tell you from personal experience, as a father, the paternal instinct kicked in with my first child, and I in fact changed my professional career because of it. That's why I work at Save the Children. It was that strong, and that's a paternal instinct. I would imagine the maternal instinct is even stronger. So if you have a cause that resonates to mothers or fathers, like a cause for children, then you should be aware of that in your communications. And then finally, Gen Z, Zoe's, these represent, let's say, my kids. I would definitely, talk to my kids in a different way through different tools and channels than I would to my parents. So it's important that you have these persona types and you take them and you experiment, but you try to be relevant to them so that it's supporter centric. Pat, anything you'd like to add to this slide before I go on?
No, I think this is great. I think people forget how many like millionaires are millennials at this point, right? And it's just important to Ettore point, like even when they're not, right? Even if they're not super high income yet, just knowing that people are moving into their peak earning years and treating them like they could be something special, right? To you and your organization. Every donor is important, obviously, but there's obviously different tiers of like the degree to which you're giving them time, energy, attention, or making them feel like they've done something important. Usually it comes after the gift. It comes post segmentation. It's a part of the stewardship process on the basis of their pre existing behaviors. Ettore's point is the big one. Treating millennial donors like they're going to give big at some point. Not asking them to do it, not making them do it, but being like we're betting on you. Like major gifts and stewardship can feel like that, where it's like they've sent these smaller donations or they've done a walk team like over 2 or 3 years in a row, just telling them like we want to be a part of your plan moving forward. Like we know you're going places, you're not, in your peak earning years, you're in your early 20s or whatever, but like you're going to be 30, 40, 50 at some point, and like we want to grow together. And like we're pretty much betting on you to be an important philanthropist for us in our organization. Like people are looking for that opportunity, especially early in their careers. Nonprofits can give them that in the same way that that individual's professional career, their friends, their family, their personal life can. So making it clear to people, to Dora's point, like it's not always an ask. You also want to talk about your impact and everything else. It can also just be stuff like that, where it's like you're actually interested in developing a relationship with them because you think they're going to be important. They're going to make a lot of money. They're going to be influential. They're going to have great careers. Like people want people like that and organizations like that in their lives. It's the whole Dale Carnegie, how to win friends and influence people premise. If nonprofits are giving millennials their feeling of importance as a part of their giving experience, right? That's one of the biggest ways to not only retain those millennial donors, but to actually create that bridge into major gifts rather than having them have that happen later in their life. And what's happening to a scary degree is they're just parking assets in donor advised funds that they intend to distribute. That's 20, that's 30, that's 40 years from now, right? Getting that relationship happening now because you're telling them that they can be important, I think is key.
Yeah, that's a great point, Pat. I'm going to double click on one thing you said about valuing your donor, and it's their time and attention, their network and their influence is just as valuable as their money. And a lot of nonprofits lose sight of that, and they just look at the numbers and they look at just the value from a wealth perspective or a giving potential, and they lose out on the insight that these are people, they're humans, and they care about causes like yours. That's why they have donated, and you got to treat them that way. So don't always ask in all of your communications a financial contribution. They'll know how to find the donate button. They're pretty smart, right? That's the easiest place to find, and yet that isn't doesn't talk about impact. So those, what we call those, is stewardship emails. They don't have an ask, or certainly not a hard ask, and those are just as important as the asks. Think about Gary Vaynerchuk's book, Jab, 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 right hook. The premise of that book is, if you just try to swing for knockouts every time, so you ask for a donation every time, you'll probably swing and miss a lot. But if you jab, if you nurture your prospect over time, then they're more susceptible to a knockout donation.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well put.
This next slide here is a hypothesis that that I've been thinking about for a generation, if you will, and that is, um, the charity brand loyalty or influence is not inherited vertically, but rather passed along peer-to-peer horizontally and stewarded on a one-to-one basis, right? And this maps to an earlier slide that Pat talked to about the three ways that sort of wealth is and donations are passed along, right? They're either sort of a paternal and passed along generationally from a family. They're either peer or stewarded directly from the organization. Think about Dell going direct in the dot-com era. That was transformative for them at the time, a new way to go DTC, direct to consumer. Well, we have to be, you know, DTS, direct to supporter, DDT, direct to donor organizations, and a lot of these tools that the Giving Block have built enable you to do that. That's the best way to steward the donor, directly from the brand. But if you can't get there, the indirect, inbound, peer-to-peer way, the horizontal way, is so powerful because they're not hearing about how good you are from you and your organization. There's inherent bias in that. If I say I'm the best, that's biased. But if Pat says I'm the best, that's much more powerful. A respected peer third party endorsement. So that's what you need to do to start some of these relationships, is the ability to have, is what Seth Godin says, is pass along, this peer to peer, flipping the funnel from this web 1.0 funnel that is just this way to a horizontal funnel that is sideways. Enable your donors to talk about you, and in fact some of them might even do the fundraising for you. And that is why the ushering in of Web 2 and peer-to-peer communications and fundraising tools has been so effective, because it enables your supporters to do that very thing, which is even more powerful than a gift, is to inspire your supporters to fundraise on your behalf. Talk about loyalty. That is loyal. I'll pause there, Pat, for any other comments.
I think that's wonderful. I think it's a really good point in terms of like how you acquire net new donors through that network effect. Like it's way easier to get net new younger donors through their friends than through their family. Like it's not inherited vertically, to Tori's point, it's lateral. In terms of making that, rather than just a net new donor acquisition from like a one-time gift to like true loyalty, like there's definitely things that we see as consistent patterns. We talked about this, Ettore, as we were like putting the slides together. But some of these things are really important. And every nonprofit kind of does this, but not consistently enough and not deep enough with younger donors. This is again kind of like the winner loser divide when it comes to millennial donors. There's a couple things that nonprofits avoid. One is being the best at something. So a lot of nonprofits, and this comes down to like older donors, like when they're giving to a church or a nonprofit, whatever else it is, the community basis, or it's inherited through a family, older donors are more okay with that because they grew up in a different generation, right? They would buy a pair of shoes and it would be awesome and it's well made. And you would just kind of stick to that because there was no internet, right? Like there's no way to compare it. Like even when I was a kid, like you're not Googling stuff. Like it's still a relatively recent development. Right now, when you're talking to younger donors, whether they're buying boots or they're giving to a charity, they're pulling up multiple tabs, right? And even if they're not pulling up multiple tabs, that's what's happening in the back of their mind. If they gave to you because you're serving a particular cause right now, right? The response to Ukraine crisis. That's great to get that donation. If you want to keep them as a donor when it's a younger donor, you need to convince that donor that you are the best at something. There's something about your model that is the most efficient, right? Or you have people that you pay a lot of money to sit in desks and you're the most strategic. There's other nonprofits out there that don't have overhead, right? We intend to have this overhead because we don't want to just keep delivering, aid into this region. We want to solve the hunger crisis. Like they need to be bought in on this is our thesis, this is our strategy. Like I think this organization is the best at because they will compare you to other things. And if other people are making an argument and comparing themselves to you and you're avoiding kind of that competitive comparison, you're going to get beat by the organizations that do it. Everyone's got a model of comparison. They're going to be looking across different orgs. They're not just going to stick with you because you work. You need to work the best, and they need to be believing in that. And then another big piece of this that I think is really important for millennials is what's the plan long term? There's a lot of, again, like percent, like bet on them early. When you tell a millennial, like over the next 5 years, 10 years, et cetera, want you to do something, or if they're building a walks team a couple years in a row, it's like if the walk becomes less exciting and they move out of that city, it's not going to stick. They need to feel like they're building towards something with you, right? If there's a research grant that's going out in 5 years, they're not making a ton of money right now. It could be like a $10,000 goal over the next 5 years, and they're building toward that. They need to feel like they're in some sort of a mission with you, right? Because if their ideology shifts or they're focused on a different problem, if they're not really aligned with you on some long-term plan, I think that can be kind of dangerous versus other nonprofits or other donors, I think have inherent brand loyalty. The loyalty is really to the ideology, the mission, and the depth of it. If they're convinced you're genuinely the best at something and you guys are both in on it together, I think younger donors are going to stick to a much greater degree.
Great points there, Pat. So this is just a glimpse at the future here, and I know we're going to get to questions very soon, it looks like, Jasmine, but there's also the next generation's alpha and beta that are coming. And we talk about the 30 trillion wealth transfer. Well, there's 5.5 trillion wealth transfer that'll be available to Gen Alpha right around the corner. So we need to be ready for that. Here is just a brief slide of our overview. We talked about self-fulfilling prophecies earlier. To quote Henry Ford, whether you think you can or you think you can't, either way, you're right. So if you think, no, I won't be able to attract a crypto donor, then you're right. But if you think, yeah, I can attract a crypto donor, then you're also right.